everything you write is a chance for you to get them to read more. Remember what I always said about what's the most important thing of any scene is to keep the reader reading. Same applies if you're applying to an agent or an editor. You want to keep them reading from the first sentence of your letter. Hello, everyone. How nice to see you all back. So I can't believe it. It's the 8th session. It's the very last masterclass. Today is going to be about your questions. I always, when I'm teaching live, when I'm in the room, I enter the room and I say, right, I want everyone over the lunch break or any break we're having, or just while we're sitting here, to come up with their ultimate question. Because, why not? Why not have your ultimate question answered by me if I know the answer? If I don't, I'll baffle myself around it and come up with something. Now, those who have been here before will know that I usually start with a recap of what I've done. And I'm not really going to do that so much as I'll just talk about what I hope you've learned, perhaps, or have joined me in exploring that idea of climbing the mountain, the novel as a series of ascents. Perhaps you've learned to let your characters dictate your plot rather than your plot dictate your characters. Perhaps you've also learned to oscillate around. Remember, that's one of my favorite words. Oscillate around between character and plot, between plot and structure, between structure and research. That's how the mind works, oscillating, keeping lots of different things going. I've also hope you've learned when I was talking about research that a fact uncovered is useful as a fact, as a detail, as providing context for your story, but it also can act as the springboard for the imagination, because that's something that is the most useful thing for me. I start out writing one book knowing some things, and then I discover more things, and it changes the course of the book, oscillates from research into structure or character, all those things where it's like keeping a lot of balls juggling. And, above all, I think we've talked about the idea that writing is a process, that it's, to use a cliche I would hesitate to use in my own books, but that it's a journey, not a destination, until it is a destination, which of course is when you write the end and send the book off to someone. But it is a process, and why I have broken the process into these different stages is that each stage of the process has very different drivers. And to allow the sort of driver of, this needs to be good in the first draft is, I don't think, very useful. When the first draft, as this stage of the process, is about telling yourself the story, discovering who these characters are. And a while ago, I came up with this idea, and I think I told you the story of springing an agent at, we were just having a beer, it wasn't my agent, at the Surrey Writers' Conference, and I said to him, I came up with the phrase when he was wondering about what he was going to write, because he's also a novelist, what he was going to write on the plane back to New York. I said, well, you know what I believe, Don? Writing is writing. And he sort of spat his beer at and went, what are you talking about? And I'd like to talk a little bit about that moment before we get going on the questions, and what I exactly mean by it. It's the moment of writing. It's when your fingers are on that keyboard, or when your pen, your nib is scurrying across the vellum, when ideas are coming. When you really let your mind do the things that absolute control could not make it do. I mean, there's an element of control. You're thinking all these other things. You're thinking what you want to write, but letting go of so much of the control of the conscious mind gives the rest of the mind the chance to really work. And things will happen. They just inevitably will, because there's only so much you can do. And I know I'm preaching a little to the choir here. I'm sure you've all had those experiences where if it doesn't feel like taking dictation from a muse, it's pretty close, right? And I'm not getting mystical here. It's just like you're writing stuff because it's flowing. It's going. And you're getting those words down, not judging them, not making them good or bad, but letting the mind, which I suppose is the brain as well, but not entirely. The mind and the brain are not exactly the same thing, do its job. And I don't believe it's not like you go into a trance. I mean, I think that's a lovely thought. And to be honest, when the pure dictation stuff happens, it doesn't happen very often. But in a big way, it's like sort of, oh my, this stuff is incredible. I'm just going to write it down. It does happen. But I'm thinking more of just that practical thing of getting the words down and writing. The character's pursuing this object, runs into this obstacle, which you didn't think of when you started writing that sentence. This other person's appeared who provides an obstacle or aid or something, allowing things to happen. And as I say, I don't really think this is a mystical thing. I think it's physiological. It's just taking yourself out of the equation or allowing the mind to work. It will oscillate. That is what minds do. Anyone who's tried to meditate, my girlfriend says to me when I'm off to meditate, yeah, go think of nothing, right? Which is actually not what meditation is. Your mind is always thinking of something, and it's bringing it back to the one thing which you're trying to focus on and meditate on. So your brain is going to be oscillating. It's what it likes to do. So if you just allow it to oscillate between all those things we want it to oscillate around, plot and character, and structure and research, and moving between them, allowing that to flow, that's when you start writing in a freer way, and particularly good on the first draft. Later on, you'll still be doing it, but second draft, you're going to be exerting a bit more control. Does this work? Does it not work? So, finally, just to reiterate, writing is writing. It's not thinking about how to write, it's just doing it. Just do it. Now, before we come on to the questions, and I see some are already up there, there are aspects that I of the business that I wanted to talk about, and I'm talking about the business here in a way that perhaps some of the questions we'll ask about. Have a quick look at what you're already asking me. Pacing, yeah, that'll be good, Carla. Oh yeah. What inspiration from Paul? When does it take to break the rules? Okay, yeah, I can do all that. So let me just go back to what I wanted to talk about, which is what I hope will be the stage you are all at different distances, but actually aiming for, which is the idea of selling your book, getting an editor to acquire your book, as they say, take it into an acquisition meeting, or get an agent to take you on. There's various ways of course, publishing, and I will discuss a bit about the whole self-publishing thing as well. But I'm going to assume that perhaps wrongly, that most of you want to get traditionally published by a publisher, and that would be what you'd most like. So I'm going to talk a little bit about pitching, how you actually pitch something, because writers have to be, to a certain extent, they have to be sales people. And so if you're approaching an agent or a publisher, an editor at a house, if you're approaching them, but maybe not personally, though that sometimes comes into it, but if you're writing to them, the first thing to do is to check their website, because they'll usually say, this is our submission process, and this is what you must send. And you must stick to that scrupulously. If they ask for a letter and a page, send them that. Most of them, I think, usually ask for a letter, a one-page synopsis, and then a chapter. Everything you write is a chance for you to get them to read more. Remember what I always said about what's the most important thing of any scene is to keep the reader reading. Same applies if you're applying to an agent or an editor. You want to keep them reading from the first sentence of your letter. You need to say who you are. You need to give them a 3-sentence, and I'm going to talk about this acronym quite a bit, the USP, the unique selling point. What is the most the thing that is most important about this book, that is the unique selling point, but give them maybe 3 sentences, and why you are the person to tell this story. Personal connections are good. They like that. They like a personal connection, even if it's an outrageous fiction, inspired by, or when I did it slightly differently when I landed my first agent in London. I'd read a book by Guy Gabriel Kay called Tigana. Some years before, I thought, if ever I write, I'd like to write something as epic and passionate as this. And then I found out who his agent was, and then I wrote to him and said, "Oh, you represent Guy Gabriel Kay. I think I write a bit like him." And so, it worked. I'm not saying it will always work, but it worked, and she took me on. Eventually, there was a bit of stalking. No, not exactly stalking. There was an element of stalking in that I fetched up at her office one day, having sent her the letter and the 1-pager and the 3 chapters. And when I fetched up at their office, she took me on and had the book sold 3 months later. So it was a very good news story. But if you're writing that letter, first paragraph is yourself, or first line is yourself and the title of the book. Then the second line is basically what it's about in as snappy a way as possible. I mean, if you're going to do it in one sentence, thinking of movie posters, perhaps, that wonderful poster for Alien in space, no one can hear you scream. It's always a good one. I've always flattered myself that I could have been an advertising man and probably made much more money than I did as a writer. But I like coming up with single snappy sentences that will go on top of the book, what they call the shout line. And for my first novel, The French Executioner, it was about the man who killed Anne Boleyn. So I wrote Anne Boleyn's killer and her last hope. Paradox, always nice to get a paradox in. Then a very few sentences that would intrigue, that would pull them in. With Plague, my novel Plague, I said, I came up with the sort of shout line, Plague, murder has a new friend, because it's going to be a crime story. And then the pitch was a religious fundamentalist serial killer story set during the Great Plague of London. Why you are the only person to tell this unique story is a useful thing to slip into that little letter, because they are buying an author as much as a pitch. They're not publishers, in my experience, are in it more for the long run. This is less true today than it was when I started out in the game. I sound so long in the tooth, but about 20 years ago. But they're after a new voice. They're after someone who will, new, but perhaps not too new, something that's going to fit into an established genre, but give it a little shake, maybe. So you then move on to, you got past the letter, because I have to just point out one thing about these letters and this pitch. It's very likely that no agent or editor is going to read it for quite a while, if at all. The person you have to get past is the intern, quite possibly, whose job at the agency or publishing house has been to work her way through the slush pile that used to exist physically in paper and now exists electronically on computers. You've got to hook her from the first sentence. Why is she going to pass yours on and not the 9 other people? Right? So that's something to think about. Hook this person. That 1-pager, it's one of the hardest things you'll ever write. And I would get practicing now, because the key about it is, again, it's got to be full of USPs. I've read a number of them over the years, and a lot of them make the error of trying to tell the whole story at once. That you can't do it in a page, not for a novel. You've got to hit them again with USPs. Why is this going to be so exciting? And you mustn't make it a list of names. That often happens. Someone will come up with 20 names in the first paragraph. It's all these people and it's all these places. And by the time you've read the 3rd sentence, you're completely lost, the reader. So something punchy, again, look at it as a sales document. It has to really grab people. It should probably have no more than 3 people in it. The protagonist, the antagonist, and maybe if it applies to your book, either the love interest or the major sidekick and how they interact. That's what's going to be your one-pager. And make it fun. It's going to be fun, intriguing, scary, whatever your version of fun is. And then you send them the first chapter. I've had students say to me before, oh, you know, I'm going to make this pitch and I'm going to send them chapter 5 because chapter 5 is when the book gets really great. You think, no, you're not going to do that. You're going to send them chapter 1 because if someone looks at it says chapter 5 on the top, they're not even going to read it. They need to know that you're going to bring someone into a story from the first sentence, from chapter 1. So make chapter 1, make the first sentence of chapter 1 great. First sentences, we talked about it in one of the classes, has to be good. First hook the reader. And then send it off. Now, there's various opinions about, and I don't really have strong opinions about, whether to send it off to a lot of places at once or whether to really, I mean, you should do this anyway. You should target agents who represent your sort of genre. You don't want to be sending your lovingly crafted gothic horror to a publisher who mainly deals in barbecue cookbooks because they're not likely to buy it. So if you really target someone, you could also maybe include something personal. Oh, I understand you're the editor of, or you published one of my favorite authors. And I think this is that fits into the style, the genre, whatever. One thing I would, well, a couple more things to add on this, and then I'm going to get on to some questions. Choose who you pitch to quite carefully. There's a tendency, of course, you know, we've all experienced it, and maybe I've experienced it a bit more because of my other career as an actor, of submitting yourself to approval all the time. And then someone approves, gives you a job, takes you on as an agent. You think, well, I made it, that's great. But if they're not a good agent, they're not going to help your career. And though it's very tempting to grasp at anyone, just be very careful that this person who's taking you on, or this publisher that offers to publish your book, is who you want to be representing you, or to who you think are going to actually do a good job with your work, who appreciate your work and you. Because if you don't, you're going to be unhappy in a year's time, and you're going to think, I have to do the whole thing again. So, the first offer is not necessarily the best offer. Might be, but not necessarily. The other thing to do is to really try to get to know some agents. And a great way of doing this, when the world opens up again, of course, may it be soon, is to go to conferences. Conferences, at writers' conferences, and you can join groups as well, of course, who represent, who run these conferences. I will name you 3 straight away, 1 in Canada and 2 in the States that I think are really good. I've taught at them, so I'm a bit biased, but the Surrey Writers' Conference in Surrey, BC, it's an international, I mean, certainly North American conference. You meet agents there, you meet editors there, you can do craft workshops, you can do business workshops, you can learn so much. But the point is there's lots of editors and agents there, and they are there, not because they think, oh no, I'm going to a weekend and I'm going to be tested. They want to find the book. They want your book. They do. And, there's a tradition. You can pitch them in the elevator. I mean, an actual elevator pitch. So think of doing that. They're not cheap, but it's best if you go the whole weekend, go to the meals, because that's where a lot of the socializing happens. People they'll mingle around the tables. It's all a good thing. Surrey's very good. PNWA in Seattle is very good. Pacific Northwest Writers. Again, I've taught there. And Willamette is another good one, which is in Portland, Oregon. When they open up again, have a look at all 3. See who's teaching, who, maybe there's an agent there who you've researched that, you might want to meet. So that's a good thing to do. Very briefly, 2 other things. Self-publishing, they've all done it, right? I mean, James Joyce, lots of people self-publish. I've self-published. I have my last novel, One London Day, which is a modern thriller and therefore not fantasy, as I'm known as at VPL, or historical fiction, as I'm known as elsewhere as C.C. Humphreys. Carla, the conference in Portland is called Willamette, That's how you pronounce it, but it's spelt Willam, Willamette, the Willamette Writers Conference. So it was turned down in the most glowing terms by most of the crime editors in London, because it's a London crime story, one London day. They said, oh no, this is marvelous, it's noir, it's so different, it's so interesting. Who's the protagonist? You know, they just didn't get a multi-narrator book that went from character viewpoint to character viewpoint, that was written in a noirish style. They just couldn't find out where to place it, which actually means the marketing department didn't know what to do with it, which is why editors go, oh, I don't know what. So anyway, I self-published it. It's doing quite well out there. There's lots, workshops for days to deal with how to self-publish and why you should and all that sort of stuff. But the big suggestion I would have is to join somewhere like the Creative Academy, who are wonderful people. Just look them up, Creative Academy. And I don't think they even charge anymore. I think it's a sort of more pay what you can type thing, but don't quote me on that. They might kill me for it. But they're really smart people. Crystal Stranahan was one of the main people there, and she's self-published to great success a lot. And you can take workshops. They've got a big library online about how to do these things. So if you're interested in that, and there are pros and cons, you have to do a lot of work, but you control the price, you control the cover, you control the editing, you control the artwork, the advertising, everything. A lot of work, but it's sometimes preferable to handing it over to someone who perhaps doesn't do very much with it, which has been my sometime experience. Right, I'm going to get on to questions. And oh look, there's lots more already. Let me pull up some of these here. When is it safe to break the rules? For example, on using introspective instead of action. Well, are you talking about my rules, Keith? My rules, because I'm not big on introspection, as you know. I prefer characters revealed by action. But if you're talking my rules, I would say I don't have them really. I encourage people to not. I encourage people to keep readers reading, and however you choose to do that, that's what you need to do. It's not that I never go introspective. I think by that you might mean interior monologue and stuff like that. You need to do it sometimes. A character has to think, oh, Captain Cloak thought, she's pretty. You know, that's something short and sharp. Sometimes the captain has to remember. Flashback to a battlefield in England where he lost his best friend. There are moments. The key, I think, Keith, is to do it like any type of writing, judiciously. If you have a whole chapter told in interior monologue, I'm not sure it would hold. You have to always weigh it against the criteria of, is this interesting? Is this keeping the reader reading? If the voice is particularly interesting, I mean, let's face it, there's great works of literature that have been written from introspection and interior monologue. I mean, a lot of James Joyce, and I'm not sure I could read it. I mean, I've tried. But, I mean, does anyone actually read Finnegan's Wake? I don't know. But there you are. That's a whole book of it. Hailed as one of the great works of literature. For the type of stuff we're doing, and I suspect most of us gathered here are more aiming in the genre world. Genre relies more heavily on action. So if you're saying my rules are don't do introspective, that's not true. Just be careful about it. Maybe do it as much as you want in that first draft, remember, where no rules really apply. You're just trying to get the story out. Maybe you needed your character to do that sort of interior thought to learn more about them. It might not show up in your final draft. Right, let's see who else we have here. Paul Carter, with reference to the content covered in these sessions, do you ever look back on works that inspired you at an early age, perhaps even some classics in their field, and see them as unlikely to succeed if they were published today? That's a very interesting question. You know, we all have our favorites from the past, the ones that really inspired us to write. I think I've mentioned a couple of mine, like Rosemary Sutcliffe, who some of you may know, but was a glorious writer of historical fiction, often young adult fiction, but not only. Still wrote one of the best Arthur books ever called Sword at Sunset, I think. I've reread her in the last few years, and yes, it feels a little dated. It's scary to think because, here am I, a modern novelist, even though I write fiction and fantasy and crime, thinking, in 50 years' time, are they going to go, oh, he's really dated? Probably. But I don't know, a well-written book will find a market, and they were very well-written books. I do fear that given the more commercial attitudes to publishing now, the fact that marketing departments really run the industry much more than editors do, really, in terms of being able to pick the book they really like, that some of them might not get published. They'd say, oh, it's too old-fashioned, how do we, no one is reading tales of young Vikings we want wizards and things like that. So, it's an interesting question because it's entirely possible that much of it, perhaps all of it, would not get picked up today. But again, you would only assume that they're such good writers that they would be writing in the present style, because she was writing in the style that was acceptable at the time, for example, Rosemary Sutcliffe. So I think the key is to use those classics to inspire you, but write in what style you've discovered is suitable for the present day. Carla has said, do you have guidelines for creating good pacing in a story? Rules, a system? No, is the simple answer. I don't have rules or a system. It's one of those things, you good pacing, you know it when you see it. I talked a bit about pacing. I think one of the keys for me about pacing is to regard it as a piece of music, almost, that you have a flow, and then it might get, symphony, it might get very powerful and a lot of brass, and this battle is fought upon your pages or whatever. And then you need to give your readers a bit of a break. So pacing to me is about not sticking on one note for too long, not battering away at something. So if you've started on a steady, these are the characters, you take them into terrible action, it goes up a pitch, it stays at that pitch for quite a while, so you're already at this level up here, maybe. I'm not sure this worked well on camera. Anyway, you're at this level, and then maybe you need to drop it right down. Maybe you need the pause. Pausing is good. So that, again, with pacing, applies differently at different stages of the novel. If you only need to see it on films, and writing is writing in film as well, but you're moving towards a climax in a film, and it builds and builds and builds. So the last act of a film, which is usually the last 30 pages of a screenplay, tends to go whoa, and keep going up. Same things would apply, so maybe that is the rule or the system. It would apply in a novel, but spread out over a long period of time. You do want to build to a climax, but even within the climax, you need to pace it so that so if you've had a real whoosh, a real excitement of the clash of these, the hero and the villain are fighting, but then get separated somehow on the battlefield, and then you go off to someone else's point of view, who's realizing that all their dreams are gone, and you have that mourning for a bit, and then you're back into the action. So using point and counterpoint, I suppose, to use the musical analogy, using something really strong, contrasting it with something small that gives us a little break, then something strong again. And as you're building to the end of a book, the pauses between the strong action gets less and less, and then it explodes at the end. And then you have, again, it's funny, I've been writing about in my World War II novel, the novel I've been working on, I've been working with classical music, which is not my strong point at all, so I'm having to learn a lot about it. And and studying how they build up and the different things. You go to the allegro and then the andante and then the scherzo, which tends to be a repetition but even stronger. And then at the end there's a coda often, and that's the same in films or quite a lot of novels where after the heat of the battle you get this. Right. Can you talk about the hook? Asks Keith. Getting the reader involved in your story from the first line and page. Yeah, well, it is exactly that, Keith. I love first lines. I think I've shared a few with you, but I'll share another couple. The snow lay deep on Hounslow Heath, and the light was fading fast. It's the first line of Jack Absolute. The first paragraph of Jack Absolute is that. It's about marching to a duel and thinking, I'm going to die. I'm going to die because this guy's way younger than me and much more, he's much in better shape and training and all that stuff. Anyway, but that was it. That's the beginning straight away. So you've got the start of the French Execution, which I still think is probably my best first line. It was unseasonably cold for a late May night, but the former occupant of the gibbet was too dead to care, and his replacement too unconscious. That seemed to work. First line of my career, my novel writing career. So we talked about the concept of in media res, the Latin phrase in the middle of things. They use it in screenplays a lot. It's a great way to start. You need to start punching and keep punching to keep people hooked on that opening. So think of in media res. Think of how you can, if you thought of, this is my character, he's doing all this and he's saying goodbye to his wife and going onto the train and stuff. I mean, unless there's an element of, why is the reader going to keep reading? Maybe you need to start with when he gets to the platform and someone jumps onto the tracks or is pushed. And then he thinks back, but this day is normal. I said goodbye to my wife. I drank a cup of tea. She gave me a peck on the cheek, all that. So hook them first. And then when you've bought the time, you can go back and spread it out a little more. How do you know when you've finished a project? I feel I could do rewrites forever. It's a really good question because there's different ways of finishing. It's kind of that I like to quote Winston Churchill at least once in a series of masterclasses, and when he was talking about the end of the Battle of Britain, which Britain had won effectively and staved off the threat of German invasion. It was still at the very start of the war, and there was an awful lot still to come. But Churchill said, "It is not the end. It is not the beginning of the end, but it may be the end of the beginning." Thank you for my Winston Churchill impersonation, probably terrible. Anyway, the end of the beginning. I often say to people, yeah, I finished my novel. Oh, it's done. It's not, no, it's not done. I finished the first draft. And then I finished the second draft. Last week, I sent off the work in progress that I've been working on my entire residency, my World War II novel, Sonata at Midnight. I sent it off to the editor. So it's still not finished, but I'd taken it as far as I could go. Remember that idea of the mountain, that second climb, when you've fixed a path up the mountain that your editor's going to follow. They haven't actually followed it yet. Now you've done everything you feel you can. Now the editor is going to step in and go, yeah, but what about there? Or, I kind of missed that. Or, trying to clarify your vision, which is what we talked about an editor's job being. So how do you know when you finish the project? When a reader can go into a bookstore and buy it, or go online and buy it. That's when it's finished, truly, truly finished. Because here's a slightly tricky concept, but there's no such thing as perfection in writing, in any art, actually. It might be really good, but it can't be perfect. I heard a story once about Arab carpet makers, or maybe they were in the old markets in Baghdad and stuff. and how they're beautiful, absolutely stunning, symmetrical, colored, everything. But they would unravel one knot or one chord because only God can be perfect. They don't want perfection. Art should not be perfect. So there's no amount of rewriting you can do that's going to make it perfect for everyone. A book that is that everyone loves is probably not a very good book. So you could do rewrites forever, but in the end, you're going to just possibly mar what you've already done. You've got to be able to let it go. I heard once when I first started writing plays, which was my first form, someone said to me, well, when I was thinking, well, how do I let this go? They said, well, you know, a play is never finished. It's just abandoned. So eventually you need to abandon your work. How different is a young adult book to a book written for a general or non-young adult audience? It's a question I get asked a lot because I write, I've written half a dozen so-called YA books. I'm never totally happy about the publisher's definitions of what is YA and what is adult. We know today that adults are reading young adults and teenagers are reading adult books. I always just write the best book I can. It's kind of down to marketers to market it in a certain way. I mean, do I make different writing choices? Not really. A little, perhaps a little, not hugely. I mean, the worst thing you could do is talk down to a teenager. Let's face it, I have one, I know. I suppose the best way to put it is that your choice of protagonist would probably be younger. That would be the big difference to me. The threat might come from the oldies, but the protagonist tends to be younger, as they are in all my YA books. Though I have got a 500-year-old unicorn as one protagonist, really. So, though, as you all know, I tend to cut to the chase quite quickly. I don't tend to dwell on introspection or things like that too much. I might do it even more in a young adult book. I might just think, yeah, we don't really need these people sitting around talking like this. Let's have a giant Balrog run to the camp. So that would be one of my differences of these two genres. Now, I've only had a few questions and everyone out there surely has a question. Chris, where do you find inspiration? Well, actually, that is a good question. Where do I find my inspiration? I tend to see the world in terms of story. It's how I remember things. If I can make a story up about something I've done or seen or read, then I'll remember it. The interesting thing about that is, of course, and we won't go into a great psychological discussion about what memory is, but we know how flawed it is and how people see things quite differently, the same incident quite differently. I heard the theory, which seems to ring true to me, that you don't actually remember something, you remember the last time you told someone, and that has become the truth. You think back to something that happened in your childhood and you think, oh yeah, that absolutely happened. But then you forget all the times you've adapted it into a story and you've changed it to suit the audience. Maybe it's a judge, maybe it's your parents, maybe it's the policeman who's arrested. So I find inspiration in seeing something that two objects come together and suddenly I think, well, that could be linked and that could be linked. That's the story. There's someone did this and someone reacted in this way. That's the story. I'm always trying to tease stories out. So I think way back in one of my early classes, I shared the idea of something I used to do a lot and do a little less now, but on occasion still, which was the beginning of my what became the Immortal's Blood trilogy, Smoke in the Glass, The Coming of the Dark, Book 2, and Book 3, The Wars of Gods and Men, which is out in March. And that began with an agent saying to me, why don't you write high epic fantasy? And I was like, oh, why should I? And they said, oh, yeah, because, you know, it's the sort of stuff you do, it would work, you know, you're big on the epic anyway. And this is the market that's doing really well. Do you have any ideas? And I went, not really. But so I sat down and I took a piece of paper and I think I did do this on the board. I drew a circle and I wrote the first word that came into my head, but obviously I must have been thinking about it, which was immortality. Immortality. And I started riffing off that. It's called word association. And I riffed off that. And the next word was long life. And the next word was beer, because long life used to be a beer in England. But the next word was ale. The next word was Vikings. The next word, and gradually I filled a page with all these thought bubbles. And something happens when you do that. If you just let the mind go, that an idea will start to coalesce. And from that coalescing, if that is a word, I discovered the story, the basic story of Immortal's Blood, this world where three societies exist unbeknownst to each other, and one is Greco-Roman, and one is Viking, and one's Mesoamerican, and they all have immortality at their heart in some way. The immortals rule, the 1% rules. And there's this fourth world that doesn't have immortals, but they know about all the others. The others don't know about each other. They know about them all. And they've been promised a Messiah in the form of a child who's neither man nor woman, and both, and is coming to rule them all effectively, and will give them dominion of the whole world. That arose from those bubbles. So that's how I sometimes get inspiration. Again, I suppose I refer it back to that idea of just letting the mind do its job. That's what the mind will do. The mind likes to jump around and make strange links and tangents. So that's kind of how I do it. We've got another question here. How important to an agent is a new writer having a platform with many followers? Asks Linda. I don't know. I could hazard a guess. I've heard ghastly rumors that people are only taking on people when they've got a certain number of Twitter followers. I think it goes back to that, who's running the industry now, and it's marketers. So marketers want to know they can hit all the social media platforms, and that if an author has thousands of followers, they're going to have, it makes economic sense, I suppose. And we're all encouraged to try to get more followers. Please follow me on Twitter, by the way, Humphreys CC. I can land another 20 people today. I haven't got that many. It's the side of the business I don't like particularly. I don't mind putting up some stuff, but much rather be writing. So Linda, I don't have a full answer for you. I think it's always good to be known. It's always good to be known. I've got an example right now. Diana Gabaldon has plugged my novels from 6 years ago, Plague, while she's touring her new book, because they said, oh, what should we read when we can't get your book, or we're waiting for your book? She said, oh, read Plague by Cynthia Humphreys. My sales have gone through the roof for that book, which I self-published. I got the rights back and self-published. So that was great because she has 250,000 followers on Twitter. So that was good. So there's an example. How important to an agent, it shouldn't make the decision for the agent, but everything weighs in the scale. I really like these two authors. I like them equally. They both got great stories to tell, but this one's got 5,000 followers and this one's only got 7. They might just use that to weigh in the scale. Okay, what else do we have here? How deep do you go when researching, for example, your World War II book? How much do you worry about getting details wrong? Do you ever have additional experts who are perhaps subject matter experts? Yes, I do. Funny, you mentioned that. I sent off, because I delivered the book, I cut out the sections which are not my forte. One is music, and one is, because she's a classical flautist, the heroine, and one is flying. I'm the son of a pilot. I'm not a pilot. I've done a ton of research. I do worry about getting details right because even though I'm not writing for experts, you want experts to be able to read it. I seem to have gotten away with it so far. I wrote another book about flying called Chasing the Wind. But I'm fortunate in that my niece is married to a pilot, a fighter pilot actually, which is great. And so just today I sent him off all the flying sections. He's already helped me with strafing. If anyone knows what that is, it's fighters diving over the ground and strafing the ground. You've seen that in all the war movies. Apparently, it's much more complicated than you think. So I'm getting more details from him about that. Ditto, I've sent it off to my classical cellist friend, George, who's going to comment on some of the, because there's classical music being played in it, and I want to make sure. The other thing is, it's not just about getting the details right, research. It's about springboards to the imagination. George has already told me something that a cellist might do, which lent credence to the character in his sort of preparations to play this piece. So yes, but how much do I worry about it? Not overly, people are going, there's always going to be someone out there. The thing that can hold you back, and the thing I've emphasized all through with these workshops is, don't let things hold you back. Don't let the idea that there's this panel of experts out there who are going to be judging your every statement. They're not there. They don't exist. If they do, they should get a life, because why spend all this time picking up someone's minor errors in a book? Get the details right. Ask some people who know what they're doing, perhaps, about flying, about music, about whatever you're writing about. But don't let it stop you writing at all. Don't let it worry you. It's a book. It's a fiction in the end. It's not a fact. You're not doing. I'm not writing a flying manual. No one's going to climb into a Spitfire and think, "Oh, C.C. Humphreys said do this." Okay, so don't worry about it too much. I think we've actually done everything we can do here. I've had all these questions, which have been very good. Thank you very much for asking them. It's time, really. It's time we came to the end of these masterclasses. Thank you, and hopefully see you at one of these conferences one day with your completed manuscripts. Take care. Bye-bye.